Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well, especially with the daylight savings that happened this weekend. My name is Alexi, and I'll be your moderator for today's event, Entrepreneurship Journeys, Stories from College Students. The goal of today is to hear personal stories and learn about what it's like to be a college student, running a startup, or getting involved in entrepreneurship. I'm really excited to introduce our panelists, Ibraheem Alinur and Lilliana De Souza. So yeah, I'm going to let them kind of take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. So my name is Lilliana and I'm a current senior at Northwestern University studying computer science. I'm originally from South Florida, and then I went to the University of Miami for my freshman year and ended up transferring to Northwestern. So if you have any questions about that, you can ask me. And then since being here, I've gotten super involved with our on-campus startup incubator called The Garage. I've competed in a few pitch competitions and won them and actually implemented my ideas. I also won the Stanford Hackathon last year, and now I work at Techstars Chicago, which is a startup accelerator. It's a global startup accelerator, but I work in the Chicago branch. And after I graduate, I will be working as a software engineer at a Chicago startup called Captain. So I'm excited to answer all of your questions. I'll pass it off to Ibraheem.
Awesome. And I see we have 3 people in the event so far. So is that correct? Am I reading this wrong?
We have 9.
I see 9 eyeballs.
Yeah, we have 3 up on stage, and then we have, I think, 9 so far in our event, but hopefully people will trickle in.
Well, as it's small, I mentioned that because we can keep it kind of casual. I like smaller, intimate get-togethers. So unfortunately, if you're here and you're not looking to engage, we're probably going to ask you to introduce yourselves a little bit more so we can make this as personalized to you as possible. So I know as I'll kind of go into a little more by background, but if you have any chat questions, feel free to post them in anything about entrepreneurship from day 1 to day 300 to day 900. So a little bit more about my background. I grew up in Central Florida. So we got some Florida pride here, which I don't really think exists. No one has Florida pride. But my family's from the Caribbean. I'm a first-gen founder, low-income student who kind of went to Northwestern, received a Gates Millennium Scholarship to attend, which was super exciting for me. And my entrepreneurial journey probably started my senior year of high school. And I can kind of talk through like any specific cases, but I'll just kind of list them out in short cases. Because if you're into startups, you'll get into a lot of different things. So I started my career in angel investment. I actually worked in angel investment for 10 months when I was a senior of high school. Crazy story of how I landed that. I won't get into it, probably a later conversation, but I actually came in material science. I didn't really know what entrepreneurship was. It wasn't something I had ever intended to be an entrepreneur. It was more of like a learned thing. It's kind of like when you get to college, everyone talk about consulting. Never knew what consulting was. So my degree was in material science at the time, but I think I was going to do research in nanotechnology. I did that for my freshman year summer, but I realized that just was not the life for me. I remember showing up to the lab at 8 a.m. on time in a suit, ready to just go, and everyone was 10 minutes late wearing sweats. So like culturally, it just was not going to be a good fit. And I think that's when I really realized that I wanted to do something for myself. And I created software companies. I wrote more than 1 million lines of code. We launched it, got 500 users, blew up in my face. It was a startup campus applicant tracking system. Interesting story, but it was one of my first big failures. And then after that, I spent 2 years working at UI Labs in digital manufacturing and cities technologies, which was a really interesting experience. Another one of those experiences which I had to ask for. They weren't recruiting actively for internships. So you share that because literally anything is possible as long as you ask and you care a lot about it. And so I harassed them enough to let me join, and I got to work in strategy. So I saw the deployment of over $300 million of capital. I worked with a lot of Fortune 100 companies, UN delegates, ambassadors, which was a really awesome and amazing experience. And that kind of what framed me to focus on city technologies. I saw the value and the impact that can have at scale. Wasn't really interested in politics. And that's when I started my company, City Health Tech, with focus on disease prevention. And so we had invented a small device that sits next to the faucet, which tracks and encourages hand washing times. And that was probably my 3rd startup. I tried to reinvent the dishwasher for like 6 months, which was incredible and weird. And then for this recent project, I've been doing this for almost 4 years now. So much like 2017, so much prior to the pandemic. And I think actually me and Lilliana have really interesting trajectories because I think the first win that we had was at Improve NU, which I got 3rd and Lilliana beat me out for 1st. But since that competition, within a year, I had won $25,000 after that $1,500. And then right after that, we were featured by the Obama Foundation, TechCrunch, Forbes, whatever. It was in a bunch of places, and we recently raised over $150,000. So it goes to show you that you start from nothing, you kind of grind, get all this weird random experiences, and then things can kind of spiral out from there. So sometimes it's just about keeping with it. But happy to pause there. And we can talk about literally anything from what does it mean to fail properly, and to also like de-risk some of that path of entrepreneurship. But I want to keep this really personalized to the people who are in the chat. So if you can engage there, it'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, so I want to open it up to the floor. At any time, anyone is welcome to post in the chat any sort of question. And you're also welcome to share your audio and video, and we can invite you up onto the stage and you can ask a question. Yeah, I will kind of give a few minutes for that. In the meantime, though, I guess I have, a few questions. So while people in the audience are thinking of what they want to ask. To both of you, why get into entrepreneurship? What was the reason why each of you got into it?
I am similar to Ibrahim. I also grew up a low-income student and didn't know anything about entrepreneurship. I actually came in as a math major, but we had an event at the garage that I saw a flyer for. And again, that's our startup center at Northwestern, but I'm sure lots of you have them in your respective schools. And I just saw a flyer. So I walked in and went to they call it startup matchmaking. So it's kind of so that you can meet the other startups and hear about what they're working on and maybe join a team. And I ended up learning about the student entrepreneurship club called EPIC, which I'm now the president of. So it's kind of like a nice story, but I ended up meeting the presidents for that. And they were like, oh, you should join, you should come to our meetings. So I started going to the meetings there with no commitment or anything like that. And then I ended up being like, oh, this is really cool. And then they have a yearly trip out to Silicon Valley that you can apply for. They take about 10 students over there, and they visit a bunch of startups and some tech companies where Northwestern alumni work, whether they're founding that company or they are a founding member. And so I got to see all of these startups in December of my first year on campus. I understood oh, this is the tech world. This is what that is. Because we don't really have that much. Miami's trying to be a tech city, but where I grew up, it's not really, we're kind of behind, Chicago's catching up, but Miami is even further behind. So going out to Silicon Valley, I was like, wow. And so I truly understood what entrepreneurship was at that point. And I felt so inspired by it, and nothing had ever invigorated me like that before. So I knew I wanted to dive right in. And I actually just wrote a whole letter back to a fellowship I'm part of in the garage. And I wanted to share the same wisdom with you guys, which was finding what makes you that excited and makes you want to wake up and want to go work on it, whether it's design or music or entrepreneurship. You should spend your college years trying to find that, because once you do, that's what's going to make you the most successful, because work will no longer feel like a chore when you're working on that one thing that you really love. And so, yeah, that was entrepreneurship for me.
I think entrepreneurship for me, my mom tells me a story of how I was always selling things. Even when I was little, I'd be selling things to my siblings or trying to be like, hey, I'll trade you 5 cookies for this snack. And I was always very gregarious as a child. And even since I was little, I was selling candy out of my backpack. I was tutoring since the age of 10 because I knew my mom made it very clear that my future was up to me. I remember when I was in elementary school, she was like, oh, you don't want to go to school? Well, you can go mow the lawn. You can start pulling some weeds because, equal contributions, but it's what path do you want to take, right? And I think that's really what inspired me to kind of do what I wanted to do. My mom was never about, you have to do X, Y, or Z. She just wanted me to try my hardest. And the 2 things she said I couldn't be was homeless and also a politician. So those are my 2 constraints. And not to say anything bad about politics, but it's just something she never wanted me to go into. And with that context, I had a very interesting upbringing where I almost didn't go to college. That was not something that was on my track unless I got into a really good school or I got a scholarship. I was most likely going to work. And I was actually excited to go into the workforce and actually create some value and get my hands dirty. But actually, it was my junior year of high school. And I remember this year fondly because I was failing my classes. I was not doing that well. I had taken BC Calc, Physics C. I had maxed out. Before I graduated, I ended up taking 16 AP classes, and I dual enrolled 6 classes. And that was only because I was so scared shitless of the real world that I was I need to do as much as I can because I want to be able to not starve like I was when I was growing up. So that was maybe a little bit of an irrational fear. But I think all of this kind of melded into my junior year, where I got into a summer program at MIT. It was the only program I had applied to. Was called MITES, and that was like a very transformational experience for me. It actually made going to a top 10 school a lot more accessible. When people like drop like Northwestern, Chicago, Harvard, MIT, these names are really intimidating. And unless you're in those circles where that's normal, it can really sound pretentious. It can sound a lot of things, and there's a lot of mental barriers to get over to even to apply to a school like this. And so that was a really transformational experience for me. And then I also got really lucky. And so I think this is also, I think, a parallel story to entrepreneurship. It's about building momentum, right? It's like, what is that first win for you? And then how do you carry that win to your next win? And so after I got into that summer program, I ended up getting into the Gates Millennium Scholarship Program, which then allowed me to get into a lot more schools. And I share this because it was actually my senior year of high school. If none of that had happened, I never would have applied for MIT, and I would never have met my interviewer, who at the time, it wasn't a great interview. I mean, as a senior in high school, like, what did I know? And I remember she had mentioned she had done something like Shark Tank at the end of the meeting, and I had no clue what that meant. That was actually my first interview really formally ever. And I was like, hey, I would love to learn more. I sent her an email, my 2-page resume with a list of AP classes. And it was I keep it on my desktop because that resume is so embarrassing. But she took pity on me and let me interview. And she like had all of her partners come in and we talked. And I was I was a great talker and communicator, and I was really passionate about this. And she ended up bringing me on. And so I had no clue what I had signed up for. It was 10 months I spent in angel investment. And it turns out they were the largest angel investment group in the state of Florida. And they had never taken on a high school intern or an intern period. So I actually started their intern program. And to this day, she's one of my closest supporters and mentors. And that entire relationship happened out of just pure happenstance of just emailing and say, hey, can I come work for you for free? And being really passionate about that. So that kind of exposed me to all these people who were spending millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands. I had never met anyone who made more than 100 grand. So seeing that level of wealth was really intimidating for me. But I think now 6 years later, that experience was critical in me feeling comfortable. Like, it was really uncomfortable when I started, but it kind of got my feet wet. And I saw like how much power was behind this. Like, these people, these entrepreneurs could create dozens and dozens of jobs and then create a service or product that helps people. And that blew my mind. I was like, that's pretty awesome. So that's kind of where I felt that I fit in terms of my leadership. I had an interest in politics, business, and engineering, and this kind of all flowed into what is now entrepreneurship. And I think, Lilliana, as the next question, I think it's different between being a founder versus working for a different like portion of the startup. And I think that might be a great thing to get into. It's like, what's the best way to start getting engaged? Because I had this like really weird, abnormal experience to start with. I then came into Northwestern and I joined all the student groups. I did all the basic things. I was part of Student Holdings, Global Engagement Summit. And I was just getting into like, what does it actually mean to be a business person? And so I'll pause there, and that's kind of a little bit more how I entrepreneurial started. And that's kind of how I think about it, is about community leadership at the end of the day. How many people do you know? How many people can you help? And how are you helping those people? And it's getting fun because you get to scale. And if you get to scale, you get to help more and more people. So that's kind of how I view it. And I can talk a little more about that, but I've already talked enough. So I'll pause there.
That was awesome. Another main point I want to hit home, you can see in Ibraheem's story, and it's also prevalent with mine, is finding mentors. So whenever you decide what you want to do, whether it's found a company or join a startup or get into investment or anything like that, you want to find someone either at your college or at your work that can be a mentor, like this woman was for him. Just like I have a woman and a man who both I talk to weekly. One is a professor and one is the head of the garage. And I consider them like my close mentors. And whenever I'm going to make a decision like that, I run it by them. And just finding people like that, because there are many in the world who have experience and who want to help guide someone. Just investing in a relationship like that can give you so many good things back. And oh yes, and you asked about the different kinds of being in entrepreneurship. So people don't really talk about this, but you don't have to be a founder. So I did found my own thing when I won Improve NU. But after that, I realized I wanted to like see a different side of things. So there are many different sides. You can be what they call like a joiner. So that's someone is starting a company and you join on as, you know, the head of tech or the head of marketing. You want to join on and use your skills, but you're not the founder. That's perfectly fine and fun because you can kind of jump around startups. All your eggs are not in that one basket. And so that's a great way to start. And I always tell the students that I mentor in the garage that the best place to start is joining a startup, because you can just see what's going on. Like, you can see someone doing it. And most people will let you join their startup because students don't really get paid to work on startups. They just want to help and you get the experience. So it's kind of just like a give and and take with like no money really. And so you can join a startup if you find one, if you just ask them and tell them the skills that you have and market yourself well. And that's like the perfect place to start, because you see what entrepreneurship is, kind of get your toes wet and see if that's what you want to do. You see this person running the business, you realize, oh, I really like this aspect of it, or no, I don't really want to be a founder, I want to do this. Then there are other places. So they call them like mentors or educators in the startup space are the people who run like startup accelerators. And Chicago has a big ecosystem of mentorship. And we have all these different people that are at all of these venture capitalist firms, at all of these top startups. They all give back. So at Techstars Chicago, which is kind of like Y Combinator, if you've heard of that, basically you apply and we invest in 10 companies, and then you go through a 13-week long program full of workshops, mentorship, all of this different stuff. And running that has been amazing, because I realized that there's another way you can help startups along by like being an investor in them, but working in the accelerator space, of which there are many in Chicago, is even more. It's hands-on. You're like getting down into the nitty-gritty of the business with them, looking at their financial model, at their product, at their customer segment, all of this different stuff. And then the last one is just traditional investment. So investment in startups is called venture capital. I didn't know that when I came in. And so that's what people mean when they say VC. And that's the last one. So either angel investment, which is kind of like you're an individual investing in one, or venture capital, which is like it's a firm investing. Those are more traditional. You're not kind of hands-on in the business, but you're making these decisions, and then you put money in them in the hopes that you get a return if they exit and, you know, get a lot of money. And so those are all the different areas. And I think that it's important to research or kind of get your toes wet in all the different areas, because you might find that you like one way more than the other. And it's not just founding a company. So yeah, that's kind of a misconception about entrepreneurship.
And Alexi, do you think you can put a question in the poll for us? I'd like to know, like, if people are freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior, or post.
Yeah.
I think that'll help kind of guide the rest of the conversation. And kind of also kind of expand on what Lilliana mentioned, is that like there are all these different ways to be engaged. And for me personally, I don't feel like I'd feel comfortable as a founder unless I had that operational experience. And so like if you're gonna found something, it is a lofty goal to be able to say, all right, I'm gonna start a company, I'm gonna get investors, I'm gonna do all these things that big tech startups do, but without having any prior experience about that. And sometimes you get lucky, but it's around the people who are around you. And so I would say the most valuable thing you can do is figure out like, what is your experience? Like I have experience in marketing, finance, tech, all these different things, because I was very intentional about finding those experiences throughout my first few years. And for me, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I don't know what it was about that like really pushed me to be that way, but I knew I wanted to be a founder and work on something after my graduation. And I, to this day, like I feel like I got super, super fortunate to be where I am today. But also, there was also a big de-risking piece of that. Every quarter when I was working on my startup, I would specifically figure out, okay, this is 10 weeks. I'm going to treat it almost like an internship for myself. What are the experiences that I want to get out of this? And then I also do that for my entire team. So what Lilliana mentioned is that you can bring on a lot of people. Your first step as a founder is to, one, get past that ability of saying, oh, I don't want to tell my people my idea because I'm afraid people are going to steal it. And then the next thing is going to be able to, how do you share that with people and convince them that this is going to be worth their time? And a lot of college students are looking for meaningful work that they can do, help people, and also be in a community that's not superficial. And I think that's something I really appreciated about being a founder, is that the culture was set by me. I was in all these student groups, which had a lot of large personalities, and I just did not agree with how much politics and drama were going around a lot of these student groups. And I would mention that because when you join in, you have like, there's like, oh, this is the best student group on campus, or this is the best student group on campus. It's a college campus group. The vast majority of people do not really know anything, and we're all just trying to learn. So act like it. So that was a big perception for me, is like knowing that I know nothing, but we're all going to work together to learn together. And the end of the day, we're just trying to help each other get jobs and be successful. And so that was something that I really appreciated with being a founder, is you do get to set that culture and hold that true. So if you see that something that happens in your organization and you don't like it, you axe it, you cut it out, you don't do it. And you don't have that flexibility to be able to do that in anything else. And so if you're like me, who's kind of an outlier, I wasn't like a cool kid in high school. I was the captain of our robotics team. Like the robotics kids were never the cool kids, unfortunately. Maybe nowadays, these like new next generation is kind of odd. But I'll say that you don't have to be like that super charismatic personal person, but you'll have to learn a lot of those traits. How do you talk to people? How do you convince them to join your idea? And then also being intentional about how you make sure that you're setting yourself up for success by having those moments of, okay, I accomplished X, Y, or Z. I launched a startup software. It had 1,000 million whatever page views, and I was able to manage these amount of processes. That helps you get to your next thing. And I think I mentioned that about momentum, is that like I had this experience at MIT, my Gates Millennium Scholarship, got into Northwestern, got into these student groups. Then I eventually worked on my own thing, got into the garage at Northwestern. And so I know Lillian has been mentioning that resource, but I was around when it was opened in 2015. So I've been around for like 6 years now to kind of see how a lot of that instruction has changed. But anyways, I'm kind of rambling on my entrepreneurial journey. But I think I think we have like another 40 minutes. And depending on how the chat questions come, I don't know if we're getting that many questions. I'd love to break it out by year, like freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. Because I know Liliana is just graduating. I graduated in 2020. Oh, by the way, with my degree in industrial engineering. I don't know if I mentioned that. But if we don't have any questions specifically from the poll, I think that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, actually, I think someone does have a question, so I'm going to invite them up on stage. Give me a second.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. If you want to introduce yourself, and then you can ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Mayur. I actually came here in the US to do my master's in computer science first. And then after that, I got job here. So I've been to multiple companies working as a full stack software developer. And great, thanks for like making everything happen. I think my question is like, so this talk is about entrepreneurship journeys from college to stories from college students. So I'm just, I just came here right now. So I just want to know like if someone has like a story to share and like what exactly actually helped them to start their own like entrepreneur, like company or something like a startup. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we started a bit early, so maybe not everyone got to hear kind of the intros from our speakers. But if our speakers want to, maybe summarize again your entrepreneurship journeys.
Yeah. And Mayur, just to put into context your question, you're currently working and you're looking at how you can start a startup?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Liliana. I'm a senior at Northwestern studying computer science, just like you. And I was transferred into the school. I'm from South Florida. And when I got here, I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship, but I joined some clubs and I joined our startup center on campus and slowly understood what entrepreneurship was. And then after that, I completely immersed myself. So that's like books, podcasts, talking to as many people as I could. And so especially from a background of not knowing, that's what I highly suggest to everybody that I talk to. There's like the How I Built This podcast, which is a great one. And it talks about everybody's startup journey from the companies that you know, like Airbnb or Lyft, different things like that. So definitely listening to that and reading books or listening to audiobooks. That's something that really helped me because it familiarized me with the space. And then I started to know terms and I started to see like the trends in people's founder stories. And then I was like, oh, okay. And I slowly got more and more involved and ended up winning a pitch competition at Northwestern and getting some funding to implement that idea. So that was the first thing that I founded. So I guess another thing is being able to look for opportunities. So whether it's a pitch competition or like you get into an accelerator or some workshops, even a lot of things are free in Chicago because they're investing in how to do tech, or like into becoming a tech city. So like if you haven't heard of 1871, all of you listening, you should check it out because they have a lot of free things that you can apply to. There's like the Pyros program, which is a free accelerator for any level of skill. You just have to apply, and that's an awesome resource that we have here. All these different things because the government and the city officials want us to become a tech city. So there are lots of opportunities for all of us to be founders because they want us to be. And lastly, I ended up leaving that founder space and going more in towards the investment or accelerator space at Techstars Chicago, which is a startup accelerator, like I mentioned. And so what I mentioned before that you might have missed is that you don't have to be a founder to be in entrepreneurship. You could join investment. You could join a startup, which is what I'll be doing after graduation. I'll be joining a startup as a full stack engineer, just like you. And so I might even suggest to you that you try to shift your job and join a startup that exists, maybe like not a a fresh new one with only a couple people, but maybe an established one that has like 10 to 20 people. And then you can work under them and really see what it's like before jumping in and founding your own. I think that that's one of the best things you can do, and really befriend your CEO or founder so that they can be a mentor to you when you go and start your own. That's one of the best pieces of advice someone gave me.
Yeah, and looking at the chat, it looks like a lot of the people in this session are a little bit post-grad. So we won't focus on like freshman, sophomore year things, but I think your question was also around like, how do you get started? So I actually have a little bit of things I'd like to share. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, this is working. I've never used this feature before, but this is something that I'll share, and I'll drop this in the chat actually. I share this with a lot of young entrepreneurs or people I meet. This is not endorsed by Techstars or anyone here. This is nothing but me. Oh, it was how I built this. You can find a link for that. But these are all the resources that I use to get started. So out of my 5 years of entrepreneurship, these are pretty much the summary of all the things that I've learned. And so I dropped this in the chat in case anyone's like thinking about how do I get started? I don't have resources or tools. Now you have no excuses to get started. You have a lot more than I did when I got started. So I'll walk through this deck just so you can kind of see this is how I started. So this is the business model canvas. This is like the foundation and startup, pretty much anybody who is going to be working in startups. This is a one-page version of a business model. So you kind of walk through who are your key partners, activities, resources. This is at a glance what your company is. And a lot of people use this to be able to just get a lot of those thoughts out on paper. And so we can walk through specifically how you actually operationalize a business model canvas, but you'll do this probably every quarter to kind of reevaluate where your company is and where your actual resources are. So for example, I need to be focusing on my revenue streams where we don't have a really good understanding of our key activities. You'll see as things go on how these little pieces change. That's why it's nice to document what version you're on. So this is a Google Drawings version. You can make a copy of any of these resources, download them, do whatever you'd like with them. The next piece I always encourage people to look on is budgeting and forecasting. So there's a template here where you can do a lot of assumptions, and this is more of like an income statement payroll type thing. But I would say that starting with all these things, understanding your legal fees, accounting fees, all these different pieces will help you understand if your business is going to be real. Because you can go in and actually financially say, okay, after doing this for 3 years, I know that I'm going to need this amount of money. You should always be able to predict your costs, at least generally ballpark. You'll know how much you need to do. And then the revenue piece is all BS because you never know how much money you're going to make, but it needs to be at least a plausible scenario. So you can say that if I were to sell 1,000 of these widgets at this amount of price to this audience, I think this is my month-to-month revenue, and this is how it's going to match my expenses to run that business. At the very core, if you cannot make money and be sustainable and profitable, you're not really a company. It's not going to be worth something fundable. So like the very first step for most investors is going to be looking at your financials. And so, I mean, I won't say it's the first step. I mean, when you go to fundraise, but this is a pretty key and vital step. And actually having reasonable financials. Our investor actually invested in us because our financials were not crazy. We didn't show that we're going to be $1 billion company in 3 years. We said, well, here's the average scenario where we think we can hit $10 million in the next 2 years. And he was like, okay, that's a reasonable scenario. So there are a lot of things to dive into here. So if you have any specific questions on these tools, we're happy to dive into that. The next piece is actually how do you operationalize your company. And so this is something that's really, really cool. You can actually see your vision, your purpose, your core values, your timeline of your goals. What are your 5 filters on what is your problem, solution, customer, your challenges. And this is how I operationalize my team. And this is after managing over 100 students. So at one point, we've had almost 25 students at our team that were all volunteers, which is like herding cats sometimes. So it's like you have to have really strong accountability if you're going to bring on students. But here's what generally this looks like. You have a breakdown, business model, content, customer funding, product, marketing, operations, miscellaneous software. What item is that? Who's doing it? What is the status? When are you actually going to get it done? A link to actual document. So having very simple processes like this goes a long way, and actually saying, okay, I have my business model canvas. Let me throw it on here. Let me see the dozens of tasks that I need to do to answer the question about whether or not, I'll take, for example, my dog walking app is going to be successful. Well, I should go do some customer interviews first. So I want to talk to 50 customers. But to do that, I'm going to need to get email templates. I'm going to need to get a website maybe because people want to see who I am. I need to set up my social media. And so it's very easy to spiral once you just kind of logically think about what do I need to hit this milestone. Then that's what this document is for, is you can see all the different tasks that can be done. You can filter it. Then I have a week-to-week plan. This only makes sense if you have a relatively large team, but you're actually able to see week to week what is actually everyone doing and 1 to 10 words of what you're doing. And then personally, I have a what you call an execution tracker. So here's week 1. What are the 3 or 5 things that I'm planning to do? Why am I doing it? Did I actually get it done? And give myself a rating. If you actually follow all these processes and you do this consistently for quarters and quarters on end, you'll be amazed by how much work you actually got done. And you'll be so thankful because it's documented. I think that's something that's critically important, is be able to actually document your journey and show, okay, this is actually what I've done. And especially when you look for investors, they'll, what have you been doing for your 3 years? You just have all these resources plugged up and be like, okay, I can see you've been doing work. A large portion of the time, if you're looking for an investor, you have to show that you're doing something. The last thing I'll share here, and these are other small things, is just pure accountability. Like binary, 1 or 0. Did someone show up to the alt team meeting, to the business team meeting? Did they meet their goals? And at a glance, this document, and I hold myself accountable just like everybody else does. So you can't ask more from other people than you're willing to do yourself, which I think is critically important. But at a glance, you can see who's doing what, and if you need to fire somebody, makes that conversation all the easiest. So I know that's another conversation, is like, how do you let people go? How do you onboard people? At the end of the day, it's not that deep. If people aren't doing work, let them go. So that means their interests were just not as aligned. Other cool things in here, I have, for example, pitch decks. I have actually all my winning pitch decks. So this is the one me and Lilliana did, was Improve and You, from here to where I pitched at Wildfire, to our deck that we actually got us our first investor, to a competition we won at Kellogg. So you can actually see the progression of our design language, our thinking, which is kind of cool from like a, just an anthropological perspective. Like, how did I get to where I am today, where I actually have some seed funding? So I think hopefully that was a robust answer to your question, where you can see all the tools and all the different tricks that we kind of use to get to where I am today. The rest is just kind of being scientific about your experience. I gauge everything like a scientific problem. Here's my hypothesis. Here are the things I'm going to do to test that. Okay, it didn't work. Reevaluate, improve. So getting very scientific on your methodology, I think, is important. And having tools in which you can document and show that, also important.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
I want you all to open his link in the chat, because that's an invaluable resource that he just shared with you all. Like a founder with funding is giving you some awesome tools. And what he said about the financial model is something that a lot of people skip, and that's why they fail. I see that all the time in Techstars, is that they think they have an idea, they think they have a business, but without writing down all those financials, you actually don't have anything. Even if you're making money, you're just kind of like scrapping it and like going off the cuff. But if you have a financial model, then you have a plan and you have a trajectory to grow. And that's really where you should start. If that's like something that you want to do, like have an idea and you want to build your business, build the financial model. You can even do that before you get teammates. And then talking to customers is the second really big one. Actually seeing if there's a demand there for the idea that you have. Does that answer all your questions, Leah?
This is great. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And I can also speak to being international. My co-founder, he graduated from IIT, and he was from Nigeria. So having an international co-founder makes things very, very difficult. And I know that international students don't have the same opportunity as people who are residents. Like, they have to focus on OPT or get a job focused on their degree. And I think that's also really critical, important to mention, is that not everyone has the privilege to be an entrepreneur. I do think it is a privilege. It is not a right to be an entrepreneur, unfortunately, because sometimes you have to spend money back to your family, or you can't get a job in entrepreneurship because of certain legal constraints. And that's something that is super, super difficult. And that's not something I knew when I started. I had no idea that literally only 3% of people who are not white males get funding. Like, that's an incredible statistic, right? To think about that, like 97% of funding will go to predominantly white male organizations. And that's not like to say that, oh, it's impossible, but it's to recognize the state of the culture, the ecosystem. And while it is changing, it does mean that percentage-wise, everything that you're going to do is incredibly difficult. Like, for me to get an angel investor, the average, I think the statistic is only 2% of startups will ever get their angel investor, which is absurd, like the amount of statistics and barriers that you'll have to face. And so when we talk about entrepreneurship, it's not a bright and cheery, fun place to be. I think working for a startup is exponentially more fun than being the founder. You have all the fun without the risk. You don't have to worry about, oh, do I have to go pay someone's salary or whatnot? You kind of just like, oh, this is a fun idea. You get to really be passionate about it. And at the end of the day, you got to make some money out of it as well, because you get paid a salary. The founder doesn't get paid anything. Like, on paper, I'm worth more than $1 million, but I'm like eating ramen every day because I'm actually taking a salary. Like, that's not at the expectation. And so that's one of those weird places to be, is like, not everyone has this opportunity to be an entrepreneur. You can get involved in different ways, but to be a founder does not mean it's not the end all be all. And honestly, I don't even think that's great. Like, not everyone's going to be happy being where I am today. And that's fine. It's about figuring out where you specifically fit and what's best for your situation. And we can talk about like the financial barriers and different ways to make money if that's like your goal. But I think for anyone who's going to be an entrepreneur, it's going to be about the mission. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? So it just gets a little bit existential. So thank you so much for Mayur. Do we have anybody else who has a question?
You can drop it in the chat if you don't want to come on stage, but you can request to share your audio and video. We'd love to see your face.
Yeah, Mayur's got a lot of face.
I'm gonna send you back to the audience. But thank you for your question. Okay, does anyone else have any questions? Okay.
Okay, then we're gonna talk about motivation, I think. What do you think, Lilliana, Lexi?
Yeah, that sounds great. And in the meantime, if anybody wants to drop anything, just let us know. We'll answer anything that you're wondering.
Sure. So I think motivation is key to doing what you're doing. And I think this will get, so we talked a lot about entrepreneurial tools and journey. This gets to like the vulnerability existential piece to it, because I do think that's like a big piece to being an entrepreneur, or just being a human being, right? Is figuring out why are you doing what you're doing. And for me, I kind of had this experience, like I mentioned, where I thought it was just really, really cool and I wanted to learn more. But then really boiling down, like after doing this for 6 years now, founding companies, failing, it takes a lot of resilience and motivation to say, like, this is what I actually want to do. And the way that I kind of focus on my motivation, I think it was after my very first big failures. And I'll actually share this failure. Now it's not as painful to me because it's like so distant, but we had focused on building this applicant tracking system for student groups. We had built this in campus and comfort discovery platform. So the idea was that we'd have everybody on one platform. You could see all the student groups listing virtually. You could also create your own startups and actually recruit via our platform. And it'd just be like an interesting place to have all these student groups on one platform rather than what they're currently offering. And I remember we partnered with A&O, was the organization, and we had this entire applicant tracking system where instead of using Excel spreadsheets at a student fair, they'd use our software, they get onboarded, they get resumes, all the data analytics and who's applying and whatnot, which is super beneficial to them. And we had spent all summer grinding. I was working full time, I was working 100-hour weeks just to like make sure that this code would be ready for the fall launch. We had a team of 12 people. I was constantly asking leaders, all the leaders, like pretty much anyone who was powerful on campus. My sophomore year, I was asking, hey, could you try the software out? Asking whatever clout I could possibly muster. And only one organization really bit, but it was one of the largest organizations on campus. And so really appreciate him taking that chance on me. So fall, sophomore year, we're sitting there at the student activities fair. It's going great. People are like filling out emails. We're seeing all these people join our software. And when it got to the 51st person, our entire database got wiped. All of the emails that they collected, everything, just, I don't know what happened to this day. Our platform was too big, but just deleted. And so I had to go to this person who had all this goodwill during the middle of their like recruiting, be like, sorry, I don't have your emails, but this is what I can do. And so we found a way to mitigate that afterwards, but it was painful. It was super embarrassing. I had gone to all these people and have a software blow up in my face. And you become your company, because everyone will know about you doing this, right? You'll be like, oh, that's that guy working on this project. And when it fails, it's pretty painful. Because everyone's like, oh, well, then why am I going to trust you to do your next startup? You've already failed on one, so why am I going to follow you for the next one? And unfortunately for me, my next project was Reinventing the Dishwasher, and so that one didn't go that well. I had 6 months on that. We tried to build the Keurig dishwashers, but I think it was through this process, it was actually Melissa, the director of Garage, who pushed me on this. And she's like, well, why are you doing what you're doing? I built all this software because I thought it'd be super successful. The financials were there. There was all that other like operational components there. I still think it'd be financially successful if you could execute on it. But that's not about like, you have to wake up every morning wanting to do what you're doing. And that's not something I was passionate about. And so the question was like, why are you doing what you're doing? And I remember I saw an article about smart cities just randomly on my phone. And that term really resonated with me. I was like, oh, that's really cool. What if we could make cities smarter? It's connected, more human, more sustainable. And so I put a stake in the ground. And I think this is important about setting goals. You're not always going to hit your goals, but you could move towards a goal. So I said, by the time I'm 50, I'm going to be reinventing the cities of the future. I have no clue what that means, but that's what I'm going to focus on. Lo and behold, a few weeks later, I got that opportunity at my startup where I worked there for 2 years in city infrastructure. And so I went to go look, learn, and just like kind of absorb as much as I can. And I think that really pushed my motivation, because at the end of the day with my company, I know that if I'm successful, I'm going to save a life. I'm going to help somebody go to class or do something powerful. And that's super important to me, is that like as I'm successful, other people will be successful. And actually recently I was named one of the 25 under 25 social entrepreneurs in the country, which was super, super exciting. And like you'll start getting rewarded and recognized for the work that you're doing, but it takes a long time to do that and build that brand, and you'll fail dramatically. And so I think the best thing you can do is figure out your own motivation. Why are you doing what you're doing? Because that'll carry you very, very far.
And I think a big barrier to entry for a lot of people is fear, and like fear of failing, like he just said. And I see that a lot in people, but the reason that students, obviously you guys are a little bit older, but the reason that students are able to just make new things and fail and do all that is because they have a lot less risk. And that makes sense. You guys might be working in the real world and it's a lot to take on, but not having that fear of failure, to it, knowing that it's okay if it fails, but that you'll learn from it and then try again. That's kind of a prerequisite for being an entrepreneur. And that's why it's so difficult, is because you have to be resilient. But this can be a learned skill. That's something that I've learned while taking some entrepreneurship classes, which are available online. And I suggest all of you kind of invest time in that, because you can read from a lot of people and see their resilience, and that'll just teach you different skills on how to do it as well. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I wasn't born a brave person. I don't have a high risk taking ability in my personality. You can just learn how to pick yourself up faster from things that go wrong, and that will make you more likely to like try an idea that you have. And then you don't have to jump right in. You don't have to quit your job and go work on it. Maybe it's like just Saturdays at first, or maybe you like it so much that when you get out at 5, you start working on it until it blows up, and then you can work on it full time. So seeing that it doesn't have to be like a jump in, but also you should work on your resilience and not be afraid to try. That's a prerequisite for becoming an entrepreneur.
Can you share a little bit more about like your motivation? What do you think is your like stake in the ground? Maybe you haven't thought about it, but like when you're 50, what do you want to be doing?
Mine definitely is helping people. So whatever that means at that time, this has always been my motivation. So like my startup that I made and won from Prevent You was campus-wide safety, because a lot of people were getting mugged on campus, specifically freshmen. And I didn't want, and specifically females, and I didn't want people to live in fear like that. I wanted to educate them. I wanted to teach them how they can live safer lives. And so that's what I ended up implementing for the next 9 months after that. And then after that, when I joined Techstars, I realized that I was helping the founders, because I had all this knowledge from going to a school that had a lot of entrepreneurship stuff. I actually TA'd entrepreneurship classes for the past 2 years. And so I ended up teaching them that knowledge. I run workshops at the accelerator as a college student, which is crazy. And I feel super blessed, but that's helping them. Like I wake up excited to help my founders grow and succeed. And now I'm helping restaurants. That's my new startup that I'm going to work for, Captain. We're helping restaurants take back control of their customer segments with whom they've lost due to like Grubhub, DoorDash, all these major companies who are kind of extorting all their money, because these are independently owned mom and pop restaurants, and they're going out of business because of it. So I'm going to wake up starting in July every day excited to help those business owners. So whatever that is to you, whether it's like making a smart city or just more generally like helping people, that's what mine is. Finding that, like Ibrahim said, is the most important thing, because it's going to motivate you to keep going, because things will get tough and then you're going to have to like push through that.
Yeah. And I also think that like a great way to have motivation is by helping people. So like you can see a lot of commonalities in entrepreneur. When you get to a position like this, I think it's kindness begets kindness. There is so much kindness that I experienced at Northwestern to get to me where I am today. So many people who responded to an email from an Ibraheem Alinur, you know, like you don't get an average person to respond to that email. I mean, just like based off of names, but people are willing to take the time to just have a conversation. And I think it's critically important that when you have those conversations, you find a way to deeply connect with these people, because now 4 years later, they're going to be your biggest supporters. They'll know who you are, where you're coming from, and they've actually get to see the work that you're being able to do. So I think that's really, really important. And when we talk about helping people, I feel like sometimes it can feel very like self-serving or selfish, like, yeah, I'm helping all these people, go me. But in reality, and I'll say it's selfish, I love helping people because it makes me feel good. And if there's something to be addicted on, and if it's helping people and that's my thing, like I'm totally fine with that. And I'll 100% call myself selfish for doing that. So like selfless giving, I think, is a great way to kind of get into the community and do things, rather than like, I'm just creating this because I want to make a ton of money. Also, I'll mention on money because I think both me and Lilliana come from low-income communities, but like money is something that's critically important, and you have to have that ability to fundraise for your own startups. But if you want to make startups, and I don't feel like I knew this either, being like a product manager at like a big company that's just about to IPO, so for example, DoorDash, Uber, Airbnb, right before they IPO'd, you'll make a ton of money. Like if you join a startup when they have like 300 people and you're able to have that stock as a product manager, you get paid 100 grand a year, you get cushy benefits, you'll work. But after 3 to 5 years, after you get all of your equity and your stocks, if that company's successful, you could be set for life. Like I have a lot of friends now who are working at startups, and seeing their stock is like crazy to me, like friends at Tesla or whatnot. And they'll make probably like hundreds of thousands of dollars off that stock. And that's not something no one told me that if you go just get a good like product management internship, then eventually become a PM at a startup that's growing, that is a great way to make more money than possibly being an entrepreneur myself, because the risk is just so much less than starting something else from scratch. So I'll share that to people who are like, hey, I'm getting into entrepreneurship, but I also want to be financially successful. You don't have to be a poor broke co-founder like me. You can actually, get a job at a startup that you care about and make a ton of money by having someone who has a little bit more funding. So it's all about finding those different stages. Like you might find that you like being in like the 100 to 500 employee stage versus like the 0 to 30. So again, it goes back to like figuring out what's the right fit for you. I see we have like 5 minutes left of this session. So I really think we should, I think Myra asked a question. We both go to Northwestern.
Yeah, I think all day today is run by Northwestern for Chicago Startup Week. So all the people you're going to be hearing from today is Northwestern. I think each day is a different school, right?
That's how it was last year. This year, because it's virtual, we're all mixed up now.
Okay. Ignore when I said that.
No. But that's how it was last year. Kind of confusing.
Do you have a final question? I know that we're going to have to wrap up here in a few minutes.
Yeah, we can go until 11. So if people also want to, maybe if anyone has an idea for a startup they're working on, wants to kind of get some advice on that. Okay, I think someone has a question. Let me just invite them up.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I have a question. I'm an international student. What are the challenges that an international student face in this entrepreneur journey?
What are the founder issues that challenges? So I think I can't speak to the exact personal challenges of a national student because I was born in the US, but my co-founder being Nigerian, I can speak anecdotally to being his co-founder and hearing his pains. And so one of the biggest problems, so I'll share a really great case study. So after he graduated from IIT, he got his degree in electrical engineering, and he had to make a choice. He was interested in startups, and he had his own project he had to work on, but he was not able to financially sustain himself like kind of I was, and being able to bootstrap or get credit cards or whatever that is. And also legally, that's gonna like lower his chances for getting an H-1B visa. And so I remember if he was an American student, I'm sure he would have gotten as many internships or job opportunities as he could ever imagine. But being international, he applied to over 1,000 jobs, and he only got like a few interviews. And so I think that's a great example of the difficulties international students face, is that there's a lot of legal requirements to even being hired. And so for him, it was either get this one job, that he was able to have an offer with, or go back to his home country, or go somewhere else, not the US. And so he took that position so he could stay in the country, be a little more comfortable and kind of work on his next entrepreneurial venture. Fast forward 2 years, he meets me, and I harass him enough telling him that 95% of people don't wash their hands correctly. And he's like, no way, I'm Nigerian, we always wash our hands. He goes home, he looks at his timer, and he's like, I'm gonna wash my hands for 12 seconds. And he kind of slowly got adopted that way. But we came to a point when we were fundraising last year, because his OPT was up. He didn't get sponsors for his H-1B visa. With Nigerian students, if you only have an undergraduate degree, it's very, very small percentage chance, like under like 10% even. I would even say smaller than that of even getting an H-1B visa to be sponsored here. And so my decisions, and me and him had to make the decision together, is either he goes to grad school and he gets his MBA somewhere or figures out what that looks like, or he goes home and we have to call it quits. So that's a great example of being international and having that big issue. And so now he decided he would focus and figure out his way to get his MBA. But when we fundraise, people are like, well, is he really committed? And they're like, oh, he's an MBA student. Is he actually full-time on this? Or what does that look like? And I'm like, no, he got his MBA so he can work on this full-time. Like, there was no other way for him to stay in the country to be able to do that. And I think you'll meet a lot of investors who don't understand those international problems of like, okay, well, people can work a full-time job and have a full-time startup. People can go to school and do really incredible things because they have to. There is no other choice. And so being international has a lot of barriers. Now, I will say that one of the things that having a company, so if you're somebody who like me who has a C Corp or have that ability to start a company, you can do a lot of good for international students. The number of people that I've saw who are like, I have 30 days left to get a job or else I have to leave the country. Please help me. Like, you're able to offer people like volunteer positions and have them on board so they can at least, work for the country, stay in the country, find their job, but also have to worry about them leaving in 30 days because they can't find an opportunity. So I would say if you are a supporter and you want to help the international community, you can find people who are saying, hey, I need an opportunity to stay in the country, have them onboard them, they volunteer, they do some work for you while they look for their full-time jobs. So I think that's been a great way in which we've been able to have some amazing people work on our projects and which we never would have had access to before. So by leading into the international community. So thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know a lot of international students who get much love, so appreciate you asking.
Okay, I'll send you back to the, oh, perfect. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions you want to ask? Any ideas they want to get feedback on? I'll leave that open. Oh.
Question. Can you speak to how you chose which legal business structure to choose, C Corp, etc.?
Oh, do you want to take? I can take this. This is a very easy question. So, if you're going to pick a legal entity, if you don't plan on fundraising, so within a year, I would say of your starting your company, I would pick an LLC and do that locally, or do a sole proprietorship. You don't have a partner. Only do a C Corp. And if you're going to do C Corp, I did a Delaware C Corp. Actually, I'll share who I did that with. I'm not endorsing their product or anything like that, but I felt they were really good. You can get a registered agent. I think it costs like some amount of money a year, but you can be incorporated in Delaware. And the reason why is because investors love that structure. People know what that means. And so it makes investment deals a lot easier because they're like, oh, everyone's a Delaware C Corp. But that only matters if you're going to raise VC funding or looking for institutional funds. If you're working on a product or a small service and you feel like in 2 or 3 years, maybe, you can refinance that then. I would say save the money and go to an LLC.
We usually advise people who are founding startups to make LLCs at the beginning because it's only about $150. And for that part, you don't have to make it in Delaware. It can be in Illinois. Like, you really should have it where you're going to be unless you're doing what Ibraheem said, where you're hiring an agent, because you basically have to have like boots on the ground wherever you are filing. And the point of that, I don't know if you guys have heard of that before, but it's because of their business law in that state. In Delaware, it's just the most liked in all of the 50 states, so people just make theirs. So like all the top startups or top companies that you know of are probably like filed in Delaware, even though they're like in California. And that's something I didn't know. But if you're going to make a startup, it sounds so daunting to be like, okay, well, how do I make this a business? You really just go online and you fill out a form to make it an LLC. It costs like $150, and then you're a business and you get like a business identification, and then you can make a bank account from there. And so I try to like demystify that for people because it seems very like daunting and like you have no idea how to make a business, but that's literally it. You just do that, and you have to make sure you pay your business taxes. So don't incorporate yourself until you're like in a place where you can like do that every year, because you are responsible for filing your business taxes. There's usually not much to do if you're not really like making a ton of money or spending a ton of money. But yeah, that's what it entails. Thanks, Jamie.
I think we also have
a
question in the event chat.
In the event chat. And be careful when you're posting versus event per session, just for future sessions, because everyone can see the event chat.
I see that there was a couple. So Minor said, what entrepreneurship school did I join? So we have entrepreneurship classes at Northwestern. We're really fortunate for that. But I know that there are ones online. So there's like Skillshare, and there's Udemy, and all of these different things. And you can just look up like Entrepreneurship 101, different things like that. And there are free classes online. There's also YouTube. And so those are what I was referring to, but I was really blessed, just like Ibraheem, to have a scholarship to get to go to Northwestern. So I got to take some classes here. But they also have workshops like 1871, which is what I said, in Chicago. They're invested in educating all of you in becoming entrepreneurs. So they have like all these workshops, events, all free. So start looking that up. And as soon as COVID's over, you can start like visiting there and going to their events. It's not open all the time unless you're a member, but when they have events, it's open to the public. And then how do you reach out to customers? It's hard to find people from LinkedIn, getting them to do customer surveys or get their emails. So I can speak to this one because customer discovery is something that I help my founders with a lot. So surveys are like the number one thing we say not to do because it's not going to give you true answers. It's the easiest thing to do. However, the thing that's going to help you actually grow, and Ibraheem might have a different opinion, but this is what we tell our founders, is to actually talk, like either on the phone or in a video call or in person with customers. And that's the hardest thing. It's called like the chase, right? Because you're trying to find these people to talk to. But reaching out to them is a great way, and using your network. So whether that's like Facebook and you just post on Facebook, like, hi, I'm looking for people who work in the restaurant space, or hi, I'm looking for people who work in schools for Ibraheem's startup. And it's going to take a while, and you're going to have to like do all these different channels. I know some people that are trying to talk to like suburban moms to make like a kid-friendly website. They are in all the Facebook mom chats they could ever be in. And then like when there are events and stuff, they go to them and then they like hand out things like, hey, I'd love to talk. I'd love to talk. If you have the resources, you can incentivize them with like a $5 gift card, but you don't have to. You don't have to incentivize people because people usually love talking about themselves. You just have to find the right people. And the ones that don't want to talk to you are really not going to be that helpful. So you just have to be really diligent and creative about how you're finding these people. Just sending out surveys isn't going to give you the best results. You're going to learn a lot more from having these conversations for 20, 25 minutes with someone. So, yeah.
I shared a resource in the chat. It's a program by Techstars, I believe, and the Kauffman Foundation called Venture Deals. I did this last fall. It's a great I think it's like 6 weeks or something like that, where you work in a small team. You get like all the information of what it means to actually make a venture deal. Some basic entrepreneurship like essentials, but it's more taken from a VC. It's free, and you're also able to build like a small community. So you're able to meet other entrepreneurs, VC people. There's a lot of people who are willing to network via a course like this. So if you have you have no excuses. You have a free course to go take. You have all sources. So like you can't lie and say that you're not doing this because you don't know how. So like there's enough out here to get started. But the question was around how do you actually get in front of people. I think LinkedIn. I think that's actually a great criteria for your business. Is if you're having troubles talking to your customers, then it's probably not going to be a great business, or you need to rethink that business. And sometimes talking to customers can actually be your big value. How do you actually get access to those people? A lot of people actually ask you that question. And so for me, like I was working with schools. And so I emailed, my very first batch of emails was to school nurses. I remember I emailed like 50 school nurses. I was doing like a batch a day. And we got like 5 schools that responded. Out of those 5 schools, 3 actually met up in person. We talked to them. I got to interview the school nurses, see their campus, and they eventually worked with us to pilot our devices. And so that was literally just by sending out 50 emails. We got 3 schools willing to work with us. And while you're young, I'll say this is an advantage of being younger students. A lot of people love working with students and milk that, use that. I'm a student trying to learn about the way you operationalize, blah, 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 blah. Like you have to make it very simple for people. And when you talk about like doing customer surveys, you have to figure out what your beachhead market is, meaning your first market. So for example, if I eventually want to work with governments, which I eventually do, I know I'm not going to be able to work directly with government, but I'm going to go work with the school and then build my way there because that's my first market. And then I can go to somewhere else. But figure out what is that easiest place to just get started in which you can talk to all these people who will be willing to share and support you. And then eventually they make introductions to other people and you grow from there. So I think someone has a really good article about this, about doing things that don't scale. In the early portions of your business, it's just about trying, getting things done even though it won't scale. But once you get to a place, you might figure out something that does. So unfortunately, that is the last question we'll be able to answer. But thank you so much, Alexi, for putting this event on. I appreciate being your panelist, Liliana, and thank you so much for your questions.
Yeah, thanks for everyone who joined. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you so much for sharing your journeys and your advice and resources. We really appreciate that. For the audience members, I really encourage you to go to our next event, which is actually, can I have a full-time job and a startup? So if you have questions about that, that would be a great event to go to. Yeah, in order to get there, you just click session on the left-hand side. I hope to see you there. But
thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
I'll drop my email in the chat in case anyone wants to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexi.